We are at the Financial Planning Association's annual conference in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm joined by Mark Johannessen. He's a certified financial planner from McLean, Virginia. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're talking small business here and about the challenges that they face when it comes to taxes, business succession, and other matters. Give me a sense from your clients and the things that you deal with on some of their biggest challenges.
Yeah, I think the biggest one that we see with our new small businesses is the fact that the business owner doesn't necessarily have the experience of dealing with their tax payments, and also the concept of self-employment tax, particularly if they're coming from a work environment where they were always a W-2 employee. So that's always a challenge, especially when there's uneven cash flows.
It's sort of that back of the house, taking care of the shop stuff that small business owners aren't great at, because usually they're passionate entrepreneurs or they're running their franchises or their businesses, and that whole back end really is what gets you if you don't pay attention to it.
Absolutely, so you need good advice there along the way.
And in terms of healthcare, which is a big issue for employers, small businesses, et cetera, provide it, don't provide it, provide some level of it. I know it's a big challenge, especially when it comes to hiring. How do you advise them?
Well, I can tell you it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge because of the expense of being in a small business and a small group, and that being more expensive than being in a large group, right? And then it's also the balance of, hey, how much do we take on as an employer in terms of what we're paying for our employees, and how much do they need to kick in? And it all comes down to competition and whether or not somebody else would be hired away.
Right, so being able to recruit and retain those employees, sometimes you need to throw in the healthcare and some other perks to recruit them and keep them happy. At the same time, it could be troubling in terms of making your numbers meet as a business.
Absolutely, yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges that small businesses, especially new ones, have.
Let's talk about existing or legacy small businesses that have been in business for a while but are facing new challenges, whether they're regulatory or on the healthcare front. What are you seeing in your practice, and how do you advise your clients?
Yeah, so it really comes down to the economy, right, and where you think the economy is going, and that can be probably the biggest challenge that we have. And particularly in markets where the economy has been good, hiring good quality people is really difficult, and that's obviously, it spills into cash flow because you may have to pay up to get that talent, whereas otherwise in a flat economy you might have a bigger talent pool.
Right, and it's tricky because as a small business you want to grow and invest in your business or branch out. At the same time you got to run the shop and take care of your employees and recruit and retain new employees. So there's this balancing act that they don't really teach you in small business school, do they?
No, they don't. I work for a company of 55 people, and it's definitely a balancing act on multiple fronts to keep things moving.
Let's talk about small businesses as they try to scale, whether they're new or existing, and they're trying to take that next step. They're looking at all these matters, the healthcare, the employee retention and growth, growing into new markets. But from a planning perspective, what are some of the key challenges you see small business faces as they try to scale up?
Right, well, I think it all comes down to the financial plan, right? And the plan for the owner and what they're trying to get out of this small business, and maybe looking out into the future and saying, what's my exit strategy look like from the business? And kind of starts there and works backwards. Because we see two different types of businesses. We'll see that young startup where it's built on caffeine and passion, and folks just kind of working all hours for little dollars. But then we see a lot of businesses where folks have left, they're financially independent, they've left their primary employer and they're starting it up, and they have the choices of, is this a lifestyle, or do I want to build it into more of an enterprise where I'm going to sell it off to somebody else down the road, and how does that factor into my financial plan?
Right, that exit strategy, working backwards, such a key point because they're so gung-ho on the starting up phase, the growth phase, but where's the end of that road, and what does that look like in terms of exiting out, selling, or growing?
Well, I think it depends on the business. Some businesses lend themselves better to selling out than not. If you're in Washington, D.C. and you're a lobbyist, you're built on relationships, right? And the relationships you have in Congress. That kind of goes away when you go away. Whereas if you're in a financial planning business and you have clients that have been long established and you've built an enterprise to come up below you, it's much easier to do that. So that's where you look at your business, am I going to be able to do this or not? And then you go from there and you say, okay, what's the point in time which I want to start phasing out so that I can be fully out by X date?